My grandfather was always a man of profound silences. Not those uncomfortable silences that weigh on the air, but silences laden with mystery, as if each unspoken word held an entire universe of secrets. Throughout my childhood, I watched his faded blue eyes fixed on the horizon through the living room window, and I wondered, what did this man see? What does he carry with him? He never talked about the past. Never. When I was 7 years old, I found a rusty metal box in the attic of his house. Inside were military medals, yellowed photographs of people I didn't recognize, and a letter folded so many times that the creases looked like scars on the paper. I ran downstairs, the box trembling in my small hands. "Grandpa! Grandpa! What is this?" I shouted, bursting into the room where he was reading the newspaper. His eyes slowly lifted. When he saw the box, something changed in his face. The color drained. His hands, always so steady, trembled imperceptibly. He simply reached out, took the box back and said only one word, "After." But later never came. Years passed. I grew up, went to university, built my own life. My grandfather remained that kind and distant man, always present but always inaccessible somewhere deep within his soul. My grandmother had died when I was 12, and with her it seemed that the last person who perhaps knew who he really was had gone. It was on a cold Tuesday in March that I received the call. My mother's voice was broken, choked with barely contained tears. "It's your grandfather. You need to come." The doctor said that it's only a few days. The cancer had been cruel and swift. At 89, my grandfather, that man who seemed indestructible, who repaired roofs at 80, who still walked 5 kilometers a day at 85, was confined to a hospital bed, his body finally betrayed by time and disease. I entered the hospital room and almost didn't recognize him. He was smaller, as if gravity had doubled its weight on that body that had once been so upright. But when his eyes met mine, there was still that sparkle, that glimmer of recognition and love. "Miguel." His voice was just a hoarse whisper. "I'm here, Grandpa," I said, sitting down beside the bed and taking his hand. It was almost all skin and bones now, but it still squeezed mine with surprising strength. I need to tell you," he began, but was interrupted by a dry cough that shook his frail body. "No need to talk, Grandpa. Just rest." "No!" The word came out with an intensity that startled me. His eyes widened, and in them I saw something I had never seen before: urgency, almost desperation. "There's no more time for silence. I can't leave without someone knowing. Without you knowing." And then, there in that hospital room with its white, sterile walls, under the softly humming fluorescent light, my grandfather began to speak. And what he told me in those last hours would forever change everything I thought I knew about him, about my family, about the very nature of sacrifice and love. "My name isn't Carlos Mendez," he began, and I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. At least it wasn't. "I was born Alexander Kowalski, in a small village in Poland, in 1935. He paused, his eyes losing focus as if he were seeing through time, through walls, back to a place that no longer existed. "I was only 4 years old when the war started. Have you ever seen pictures of World War II, Miguel? Have you read about it in your school books?" He laughed bitterly. "The books don't tell you. They can't. How do you describe the smell of a city burning? The sound of a bombing raid that feels like the sky itself is tearing apart? The absolute silence that follows, when even the birds forget how to sing?" His words left me frozen. All I could do was squeeze his hand and listen. My mother was a teacher. My father, a tailor. We had a simple but happy life. I had 2 older brothers, David and Samuel, and a younger sister, Anya. She was only 2 years old when everything changed. He closed his eyes, and a single tear rolled down his wrinkled face. In 1939, the Nazis invaded. At first, people thought it would be temporary, that things would go back to normal. But they didn't. They never did. First, there were the restrictions. Then, the identification procedures. Then came the ghetto. My mind was racing. My grandfather was a Holocaust survivor? How was that possible? Why had he never told me? We were forced to leave our home. Everything we had built, all our memories, packed into 2 small suitcases. We moved to a fenced-off area of the city, where hundreds of families were crammed into a few blocks. Hunger, disease, death was a constant presence. He opened his eyes again, and in them I saw an abyss of pain so deep that it hurt just to witness it. I was 8 years old when they came to get us. It was a winter night, 1943. Soldiers banging on doors, shouting, separating families. My mother grabbed me, tried to hide me, but there was nowhere to hide. We were all put into trucks, then into trains. Freight cars, Miguel. Like animals. So cramped we could barely breathe. People died standing up because there was no room to fall. My throat was constricted. Tears streamed down my face, but I couldn't move to wipe them away. 3 days on that train. No food, no water, no toilets. The smell. God, the smell. When we finally stopped, the doors opened to a nightmarish scene. Barbed wire fences stretching endlessly. Guard towers. And that gate. That damned gate with its lying words, Arbeit, mocked free. Work sets you free. He was trembling now, but he continued, as if decades of silence had finally broken a dam. Auschwitz. We were taken to Auschwitz. The name hung in the air like a ghost. As soon as we got off the train, the selection began. An SS doctor, in impeccable uniform, casually pointed left or right. Left meant the gas chambers. Right, forced labor. My mother held Anya in her arms. My father was beside us, trying to keep us together. David and Samuel were right behind. Her voice broke. The doctor looked at my mother and Anya. He pointed to the left. He looked at my father. Left. David and Samuel, only 15 and 13 years old. But strong. Right. Then he looked at me. I was small for my age, malnourished from years in the ghetto. He hesitated. He was going to send me to the left, along with my mother and sister. He stopped, his eyes widening with the memory. But David shouted, "He's strong. He can work." The guard looked at me again. David grabbed my arm and raised it, as if showing me, "He can work." The doctor shrugged and nodded to the right. I was pulled away from my mother. The last thing I saw was her face, Miguel. She was crying, but trying to smile at me, trying to be brave. She raised her hand, as if blessing me, and then she turned and walked to the left, Anya still in her arms. I never saw them again. Later, I found out they were killed that same day, gassed and burned. My mother was 34 years old. Anya was only 6. The sob that escaped him was so deep, so visceral, that I felt as if I were witnessing something sacred and terrible at the same time. The grief of more than 70 years finally being released. I waited while he composed himself, my own vision blurred by tears. My father! He continued, his voice firmer now, as if determined to finish. He went to the gas chamber because he was too weak, too old at 42. I was left alone with David and Samuel. We promised we would survive together, that we would return home together. But the camp destroys promises, Miguel. It destroys everything. We worked 18 hours a day. We ate potato peels and thin soup. We slept in wooden bunk beds, 6 people in a space made for 1. Every morning there were bodies, people who simply didn't wake up. Samuel lasted 3 months. He contracted typhus. I watched him waste away in a week, his body consumed by fever. He died one April night, calling for our mother. He was only 13 years old. He closed his eyes again, but continued speaking. David and I clung to each other. He became my father, my brother, my only reason to keep living. Every morning, we would wake up and whisper to each other, "Not today. We will not die today." It was our mantra, our prayer. This went on for almost 2 years. 2 years of stealing extra crusts of bread, sharing every crumb. 2 years of hiding from each other when we were too sick to work, carrying each other's burdens when our strength failed. David was only 18, but he looked like an old man. The countryside ages you in ways that go beyond the body. And then came January 1945. We could hear the Soviet cannons in the distance. Liberation was coming. Just a few more days, maybe weeks. We just needed to hold on a little longer. His voice became almost inaudible. But the Nazis were in a panic. They began evacuating the camp. Thousands of prisoners were forced to march in the snow, without food, without shelter. The Death March, they later called it. David was weak, very weak. He had developed an infection in his foot that was spreading. He could barely walk. "Go without me," he said. "You're small, you can blend in, you can survive. I'll only slow you down." I refused. After everything we'd been through, I wasn't going to leave him behind. So we did something desperate. When the march passed, we hid. There was a basement in one of the administrative barracks. David pushed me inside and climbed down after me. We closed the door and waited in the dark. For 3 days we stayed in that cellar. Without food, without water, listening to the sounds of the camp being destroyed above us, the Nazis burning evidence of their crimes. David's foot was getting worse and worse. Fever was consuming him. He was delirious, calling for our mother, for Samuel, reliving our days before the war. On the morning of the 4th day, everything fell silent. An absolute, terrifying silence. We waited a few more hours until I finally heard voices. But they weren't German. It was Russian. The Soviets had arrived. We were free. He opened his eyes and looked directly at me. When we emerged from that basement, stumbling into the daylight, I couldn't believe it. The guards were gone. The fences were still there, but the gates were open. Soviet soldiers were walking across the field, their faces pale with shock at what they saw. One of them saw us and ran towards us, shouting for the doctors. David collapsed into my arms. "We did it," he whispered. "Alexander, we did it." And then he smiled. For the first time in years, my brother smiled. But the infection, it was too late. The Soviet doctors did what they could, but without adequate antibiotics, amidst the chaos. David died 2 days after liberation. 2 days. He survived hell, only to die when salvation finally arrived. Tears were now streaming freely down his face. He was 19 years old, 19, and I was alone. Of all my family, only I remained. A 10-year-old boy, weighing less than 30 kilos, alone in the world. I couldn't speak. I just held his hand and cried with him. I was taken to a refugee camp. I spent months there, recovering my health, searching for any family member who might have survived. But there was no one. Everyone was dead. My entire village, almost completely wiped out. I had an international agency helping war orphans. They offered me a chance to start over in a new country, Brazil, a land I had never heard of on the other side of the world. But what was keeping me tied to Europe? Only ghosts and ashes. They gave me new documents, a new name, Carlos Mendes, born in 1935 in Portugal, his parents killed during the war. A new identity for a new life. I accepted. Alexander Kowalski died in Auschwitz, I decided. I left him there with my family. I arrived in Brazil in 1946, at the age of 11. I was adopted by a family here in São Paulo. They were good people. I never told them the truth. I learned Portuguese, went to school, and became Brazilian. I buried my past as deep as I could. I met her grandmother when I was 20 years old. Maria was the first person who made me feel that maybe, just maybe, I deserved to be happy. I married her, we had her mother and her uncles. I built a life, a good life. But the nightmares never stopped, Miguel. Every night, for more than 70 years, I go back there. I see my mother walking away. I see Samuel dying of fever. I see David smiling his last seconds of life. I carry my family with me every day. And I never told them. Not even Maria, although sometimes I think she suspected. Not even her uncles, nor her mother. I wanted to protect them from the darkness. I wanted them to have a childhood full of light, not haunted by ghosts of the past. He squeezed my hand tightly. But I was wrong, Miguel. Wrong to keep silent. Because silence doesn't protect anyone. It only allows the darkness to grow. People need to know. They need to remember. Otherwise, how will we prevent it from happening again? That box you found as a child. The medals belong to David. He won them before the war in track and field competitions. The letter was from my mother to my father, written on the day I was born. They are all I have left of them. He paused, his breathing becoming more labored. I'm telling you this now because you need to know where you come from. You carry the blood of survivors, Miguel. Of people who faced the worst of humanity and still chose love. My mother, who walked to her death trying to protect me. David, who sacrificed his last strength to keep me alive. Samuel, who shared his last crumbs of bread with me. My father, who taught us that dignity is something no one can take away, no matter what they do to your body. And I chose to build instead of destroy. I chose love instead of hate. I chose life, even when it would have been easier to let myself die along with my family. That's the lesson I want you to carry with you. Her voice was faltering now, each word a struggle. Never let hate win, Miguel. No matter what happens, no matter how much it hurts, choose love. Choose compassion. Choose to remember, not to fuel anger, but to honor those who are gone. That is the only true revenge against those who tried to erase my family from existence. That I lived, that I loved, that I created a beautiful family that continues. You are my revenge, Miguel. You and your mother and your uncles and all the generations to come. You are proof that they failed. They couldn't destroy me. They couldn't erase my family. We survived. We thrived. He smiled even through the pain. Alexander Kowalski had a beautiful family. And now, finally, I can go in peace. I can finally be reunited with my mother, my brothers, and my father. I can finally rest. Thank you for listening, my boy. Thank you for carrying this story. Don't let it die with me. Her eyelids were heavy now. I leaned down and kissed her forehead. I promise, Grandpa, I will tell your story. I will make sure they are remembered. Alexander, he whispered. Call me Alexander. Just once. Alexander, I said, my voice breaking. I love you, Alexander Kowalski. He smiled, a final tear rolling down his cheek. And I love you, Miguel. Tell everyone about David, Samuel, Anya, my mother Sarah, my father Jacob. Don't let them be forgotten. That was the last thing my grandfather said. He closed his eyes, that smile still on his lips, and gently, silently, like a candle being extinguished, he passed away. But he didn't leave in silence. He left having finally spoken, having finally freed the ghosts he carried for a lifetime. And now it was my responsibility to ensure that those voices, his voice, the voice of his family, would never be silenced again. 3 days later, we buried Carlos Mendez. But on the tombstone, following his final instructions left with his lawyer, it was written, Carlos Mendez, 1935 to 2025, born Alexander Kowalski, in memory of Sarah, Jacob, David, Samuel, and Anya Kowalski. Never forgotten, always loved. That night, in my apartment, I opened the old metal box. David's medals gleamed faintly in the lamplight. His mother's letter, written in Polish which I couldn't read but would translate, was there, each word a testament to a love that transcended death. And I began to write. I wrote the story my grandfather told me, every word, every painful detail, not to glorify suffering, but to honor survival. To ensure that David, who died at 19 thinking he had failed, knew that he hadn't failed. He saved his younger brother, and through that brother he saved generations. 6 million Jews died in the Holocaust. 6 million stories, lives, unrealized potential. My grandfather was just one person, but his story, the story of Alexander Kowalski who became Carlos Mendez, is important. Because every story is important. Because when we forget, when we let silence win, we allow those who have died to die again. And that, as my grandfather taught me with his last breath, would be the greatest tragedy of all. He never spoke of the past, until his last breath. But that last breath contained more life, more truth, more love than most people express in an entire lifetime. And now their story will live on forever. Through me. through you who are reading this, through all who choose to remember, choose to learn, choose to never allow such darkness to consume the world again. This is the promise I made to Alexander Kowalski, the Polish boy who survived the unthinkable and chose to build a life of love in the ashes of destruction. That is the promise I make to you now. Never forget. Never again.